I thought grief would be the loudest thing in the room, but it was a single sentence that silenced the funeral. My son stepped close eyes, gentle and far away, and said he wanted to make sure I was comfortable in the mansion he had bought for me. In that moment, the lilies went scentless, the low hymns fell flat, and the world tipped. I had never seen that mansion. I had been sleeping under a roof that leaked when the rain turned stubborn and catching water in a plastic bucket, while my husband's modest pension stretched thin as thread. My name is Brenda Coles, 67, widow of a good man named Michael, who loved slow breakfasts and steady promises. For more than 40 years, we lived simply in a small apartment in Davie, Florida, where the hallway always smelled like morning coffee and children thudded past in sneakers. Our son Andrew grew tall and driven and then famous for building a tech company in Miami. I told myself the quick calls and brief visits were the price of success. I tried to love his wife Serena with the kind patience older women keep in a drawer beside their aprons. She had golden hair and a smile that looked perfect in photographs, and she wore perfume so sharp it could cut a ribbon. She also had the look of someone who believed other people's lives were objects on a shelf. That morning, sunlight slid through the funeral home's glass like thin gold, and I sat in the front row with Michael's handkerchief balled between my palms. When Andrew said the word mansion, my heart stumbled. I asked him calm as I could what mansion he was talking about. Serena's smile stalled at the edges of her lipstick. She told the room I had been forgetful lately. It sounded sweet and traveled like a rumor. I stood my ground. I could still count the cracks in my walls and hear the hiss in my pipes each night. If I had lived in a mansion, I would not have been emptying a bucket at 2 a.m. When most people drifted into the hallway, Andrew led us to a small family room. The air smelled of polished wood and flowers losing their fight. He scrolled through his phone and showed me photographs. There I was, or someone who could have been me, standing in a bright kitchen with a white stone island, smiling a neat little smile. I leaned in. The woman's wrist was smooth where mine carries a pale scar from a night in 1998 when an apple slipped under a knife. The woman's cheek was spotless where mine keeps one stubborn freckle. Andrew swiped to the garden. There she stood again beside roses and a pale wall I had never seen. I told him those places had never held me. He frowned, confused, and then unsettled, and I watched a fine crack open across the faith he had in his own story. Serena's voice stayed soft and careful. She said grief made memory unreliable, that we should talk later. I asked for the deed and the bills and the door code, the plain things that tell the truth. Andrew pulled up the closing documents. My name glowed on the screen beside an electronic signature. It did not curl the way my right hand does when it writes the B in Brenda. I said it was not mine. For a few seconds, only the vent hummed, and my heartbeat thudded like a stubborn drum. Aunt Lillian, Michael's younger sister, happened to pass the door and paused when she heard us. She said she had brought me pie last week to the same old apartment where I have sat through too many lonely nights. The room seemed to tilt. Andrew's confusion turned to a careful anger. He asked his wife who the woman was in those photographs. Her hands trembled just enough to set her pearls shivering. She called the moment inappropriate. He said the truth did not keep office hours. I kept my voice even because rage burns quickly and light lasts longer. If Andrew had truly bought me a house in Coral Gables 2 years ago, I asked why had I spent those years in 4B with a noisy refrigerator and a roof that coughed when it rained? Why had every letter and bill still arrived at the same old mailbox? Why had no key other than 4B ever warmed my palm? Andrew stared at his screen as if he could force numbers to confess. Serena tried a brittle laugh and called the kitchen photos a misunderstanding. I told her misunderstandings do not forge signatures or erase scars from photographs. Outside the small room, I could hear the soft tide of whispers gather and retreat. Andrew looked from me to his wife, and in his eyes, I saw a man climbing out of a fog he had mistaken for weather. He said we would review everything, bank records, email utilities title. Serena asked us not to make a scene. I told her a scene had already been made, only not by me. There's a point in a life when you stop begging to be believed. You simply put the truth on a table and let its weight do the work. We left the funeral home with the world turned 1 degree sharper. On the ride back to Davie, the low Florida sky looked like dull pewter, and the afternoon traffic crawled past as if nothing had cracked open at the center of a family. I sat beside my son and kept my hands folded over Michael's handkerchief. I remembered how my husband would rest his palm over mine when decisions grew heavy. I heard him in my head the way you sometimes do in the first weeks after a burial, not as a ghost, but as a memory with good timing. Follow the paper. Follow the light. Do not explain yourself to darkness. Beside me, Andrew gripped the wheel as if it were the only thing that would not shift under his hands. He said he would come by in the morning. He said he was sorry without saying the word. I told him what mattered was not apology, but clarity. The truth was already awake. All we had to do was let it finish opening its eyes. Andrew arrived the next morning at 8:10 a.m., Heron-combed shirt, half tucked, a cardboard box hugged to his chest as if it might run if he loosened his grip. Rain stitched the parking lot in fine gray lines, the kind Davy gets when the weather cannot decide whether to weep or wash the world clean. He set the box on my small kitchen table, the one Michael and I had eaten at for decades, where the varnish is thin from elbows and prayer. Inside lay a stack of unopened cards addressed in my hand, a nest of printed emails, a ledger of utility statements with my name beside an address I had never slept in, and on top of it all, a black leather notebook with a neat elastic band across the cover, the kind ambitious people carry when they want their days to look tidy. He handed me the first envelope, a birthday card that had never been slit. To my beloved son, Mom, written in my hand. The year on the stamp was 2 birthdays ago. Beneath it were more envelopes with earlier dates all sent to Andrew's office, all sealed. He said he never saw them. My throat tightened around a quiet I did not want to let out as a cry. I had spent those nights believing my son had grown too important for hand ink, and all the while my words had been stopped at a door by someone who preferred silence to truth. Andrew slid the printed emails toward me. They used my name as sender, but carried a voice that did not belong to me. A voice that told a son to give his mother space to stop calling to be reasonable when love asked for nothing. I do not write like that. I do not speak like that. He nodded, as if confirming something to himself rather than to me. He had believed because the lies were polite, because they sounded like a steady person being sensible about grief. He said the words and then rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands the way boys do when they have lost something and cannot quite name it yet. I opened the black notebook. Serena's handwriting is the kind that looks measured even when it hurries a precise slant letters perched cleanly on their lines. The first pages read like a ledger of a life conducted as strategy call. Brenda informed Andrew she is resting. Send flowers to 4 B-note receipt. Tell Andrew Mom appreciates privacy. Forward nothing. Hold all mail. 1 page wore a paperclip and a title in red ink, Mother's Day. Beneath it, she had drafted a schedule down to the hour morning flowers in my name from Andrew, mid-afternoon message relaying that he was working, evening phone call to assure him I felt remembered. Goals, she wrote, keep love warm, avoid visits. My hands rested on the paper as if it might feel the apology I could not yet give my younger self. Sometimes, cruelty arrives, dressed in competence. He showed me utility bills opened in my name for the Coral Gables mansion, the ones he had assumed proved I lived there. He showed me bank transfers for $2,000 per month for 3 years' money he thought I had used to pay for medicine and groceries. He had routed his care through his wife because he was busy and because she had said that was best. I counted the months by tapping the paper lightly. 36 soft taps, 36 steady thefts of both money and meaning. I told him what Michael would say: we cannot argue with a feeling, but we can argue with a fact, and facts tend to hold up under bright light. By 11:40 a.m., we had a list in our heads, even if we did not write it. He would work with his attorney to pull every record from the bank and the title company. He would request the access logs and door codes from the security system. I would speak with Aunt Lillian and with the few neighbors who still knocked when weeks grew long. We would ask the post office to confirm who had been collecting what from the mailbox I did not know existed. The plan felt less like a crusade and more like cleaning a room after a long illness. You move one thing, then another, and the shape of your life reappears under the dust. The following afternoon at 3:15 p.m., we drove to Coral Gables without warning. Florida sunlight poured across the streets like bright water, the kind that can show you what you forgot you wanted. The mansion rose behind an iron gate, 2 stories of white stucco and terracotta tile bougainvillea spilling pink over the balcony like a curtain that had been clapped open on the wrong act. Andrew keyed in a code that should have been mine. The lock clicked a dry, concise sound that felt like a door inside my chest opening with it. We stepped into air-cooled perfume and the hush of a house that believes itself admired. Her heels sounded before she did a quick metronome on marble. She appeared at the top of the staircase in a cream silk dress, bare feet, catching the light, face arranged in welcome and surprise at once. She said my name with a sweetness that used to fool me. Andrew set the black notebook on the kitchen island with a gentle thud that made the crystal pendant lights tremble. He asked the question that needs no embroidery. Who is the woman in these photographs, and why has my mother never held these keys? Serena's first defense was elegance. She said the house had too many stairs for an older woman. She said privacy was a gift. She said she had kept watch like a good daughter-in-law, caretaking a property beyond my comfort until I wanted it. But the mask had grown thin. When Andrew asked whether she had told neighbors he was dead, whether she had accepted flowers, whether she had listed the house for sale as inheritance, the mask split. She tried tears, and then she tried anger, and finally, she tried control. You cannot make a scene, she said. This is a marriage. You will regret humiliating me. Andrew's voice turned very quiet, which is how Steele speaks when it is certain. Regret belongs to those who prefer a stage to the truth. He changed the locks that evening at 6:05 p.m. while the sun slid down the bougainvillea, and I stood at the threshold of the kitchen that should have known my footsteps. When he turned and pressed the keys into my palm, the metal felt warm, not from weather, but from a bond begrimed and now rinsed under hard water. I did not cry. I said thank you as you say it at a courthouse or a chapel, with the dignity due to vows and verdicts both. By the end of that week, the papers were signed, the locks replaced, and the lies given a proper funeral of their own. Serena vanished for a while, no calls, no texts, no explanations. But the echo of what she'd done lingered in every quiet room. Andrew and I spent evenings going through accounts and statements until midnight, and for each forged transaction or missing payment, the truth folded itself neatly into place, like a confession written in numbers. 3 days later, a woman named Rosa Alvarez called. She worked part-time as a housekeeper in Coral Gables and wanted me to know something urgent about Mrs. Serena. My heart slowed. She told me Serena had been living there for nearly 2 years under a different story, claiming to neighbors that her husband, a businessman named Andrew, had died of cancer and left her the mansion. She'd even held a small memorial. Rosa said she'd recently seen Serena planning a farewell party before moving to Europe to start anew. I gripped the phone so tightly I could hear my pulse. Even after exposure, Serena was trying to turn lies into currency one last time. Andrew came over that afternoon, jaw tight, eyes dark, with something beyond anger. She told people, "I'm dead," he said softly, as if trying to test the sound of it. "We can't just let her keep walking free." I agreed, but I reminded him that justice works best when calm holds the reins. That night, we decided we'd confront her publicly. No shouting match behind closed doors. No private explanations. Truth, once hidden, must be brought to light where everyone can see it. By Saturday evening, the mansion's yard glowed under gold-floored dusk. Andrew had invited a handful of relatives, neighbors, even Rosa. I stood beside him in a simple dark dress, while Serena arrived dragging 2 suitcases, face-painted in her practiced calm. She said she only wanted to leave quietly. Andrew replied that quiet was how lies survive, and this time, they wouldn't. He spoke evenly, holding up the property title and the evidence of transfers. When he said she had declared him dead and collected sympathy gifts, a gasp moved through the crowd. Mrs. Martinez, one of the neighbors, shook her head in disbelief. "I brought you flowers, Serena. You said he passed in March." Serena tried to laugh it off, her voice trembling. But Andrew's words cut through her denial. "No one jokes about funerals." Then it was my turn. I stepped forward, my voice steady but trembling with the weight of 2 years. I told them about the 4B apartment, the leaks, the nights of silence, when I thought my son had forgotten me, the money meant for medicine that never reached my hands. When I finished, you could hear the fountain behind us, a soft reminder that life keeps flowing, even through shame. Andrew opened the folder again. "These are the bank statements. $36,000 over 3 years, all sent in my mother's name and kept by Serena." The crowd went still. Serena's eyes darted from face to face, searching for sympathy that no longer lived there. "You can cry," I told her gently, "but tears don't clean the stains left by greed." Her lips trembled, but no words came. Andrew pulled a silver keyring from his pocket, the one that had opened this house 2 years ago. "These were always hers," he said, placing them in my palm. "Today I give them back." The moment the metal touched my skin, warmth spread through me like sunlight breaking through cloud. Not triumph, just quiet justice. Serena whispered something about being his legal wife, but Andrew didn't even raise his voice. "You left when you chose deceit over love," he said. She looked at me pleading for softness, but I only answered, "May you learn from what you've lost." Then she turned and walked away, heels clattering across the marble like punctuation marks on a story finally finished. After the last guests left, the night softened into peace. Andrew sat beside me on the porch steps, shoulders heavy. "I don't understand how I ever loved someone capable of this." I told him, "Because you loved purely. Don't let her teach you to doubt that." He nodded, eyes damp. For the first time in years, there was no misunderstanding between us. No wall of forged messages, no stolen distance. Just a mother and a son reclaiming what was always theirs, the truth. That night, I stayed in the mansion for the first time. I thought sleep would come easily after everything, but peace has its own kind of restlessness. The house was beautiful, too beautiful. It hummed with quiet luxury marble floors, a soft lavender scent, the faint trickle of the fountain outside. But under that calm, I could still feel the residue of deceit, like perfume clinging after someone leaves. I walked through each room, slowly running my hands over the cold counters, the spotless surfaces, the walls that had never heard my laughter. This was supposed to have been my home for 2 years. Instead, I'd lived among leaks and loneliness, while another woman wore my life like a costume. At 6:45 a.m., I brewed coffee and opened the kitchen windows. Sunlight poured through warm and forgiving. For the first time in years, I didn't need to catch water in a bucket. Andrew arrived later that morning, still weary, but lighter around the eyes. He came every few days after that, at first awkwardly fixing things that didn't need fixing, bringing flowers, talking too much or too little. I realized that guilt makes people fidget, and so I told him the only thing that would soothe both of us. You don't owe me things, Andrew. You owe me time. He nodded, and that became our quiet promise. The weeks that followed were soft and deliberate. I unpacked slowly, filled the kitchen shelves with old cookware, and set Michael's photo on the mantel where it belonged. In the evenings, I lit candles and played the old jazz records he used to hum along with. The house began to sound like life again, distant laughter from the street, a saucepan clinking the radio murmuring during dinner. One afternoon, I stood in the garden, trimming roses, when Rosa Alvarez stopped by, carrying a tray of flan. She smiled and said, "I'm glad this house finally looks like it belongs to someone kind." I invited her in, and from that day on, she became a friend. We planted mint and lavender together and talked about the strange ways women find strength when life tries to shrink them. 3 months later, the emptiness that used to haunt the mansion had vanished. Andrew brought a new light into it, literally and figuratively. Her name was Danielle Moore, a nurse from one of his clinics. She came over one Sunday with daisies in her hands and the kind of grace that doesn't need an audience. I studied her the way mothers study the women who might hold their sons' hearts. She wasn't flashy. She listened more than she spoke. And when she laughed, it sounded like she had nothing to hide. That day, she rolled empanada dough beside me and laughed when flour dusted her cheek. I handed her a towel, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace watching a young woman stand in that kitchen, one who built, not destroyed. By autumn, I had joined a gardening class at the community center. Every Tuesday, women my age gathered to talk about soil and sorrow, about how both could bloom again with patience. I learned to grow herbs and shared recipes, and one of the women said, "Brenda, you should host a club at your home." So I did. We read books, drank tea, and shared small heartbreaks like trading seeds. Each of us had lost something, a husband, a child, a house, a piece of faith, but sitting together made it easier to believe we hadn't lost ourselves. I often caught myself watching the fountain outside in the evenings. It used to feel like a sound of guilt, a reminder of years stolen. Now it was simply water, steady and forgiving. I understood that healing isn't loud. It's not revenge or applause. It's the quiet way you reclaim space, one breath, one chair, one garden at a time. Andrew changed, too. He stopped chasing the kind of success that shines only for strangers. He began visiting, often helping around the house, sometimes sitting on the porch, just to talk. One evening, while we shared coffee, he said softly, "Mom, I didn't just lose money or years. I lost the chance to be your son when you needed me." I took his hand. "Then don't waste what's left," I said. "Life always gives us smaller chances after the big ones we ruin." By winter, laughter lived in that house again. There were dinners, birthdays, quiet Sundays. I planted new roses, white ones this time, not to remember Serena's lies, but to mark the beginning of something honest. 6 months after that evening, when truth replaced spectacle, life found its rhythm again. The mansion no longer felt like evidence, it felt like home. Andrew and Danielle often spent weekends there, helping me paint the porch or plant more roses. Rosa still visited with her bright laugh and homemade flan, and the women from my book club brought life into the house with chatter and lemon tea. Some days I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and barely recognize the woman who once trembled at her own son's funeral. The weight in my chest had turned into air, and my face, though lined, had softened. Peace, it turns out, has its own beauty. Then, one April morning at 9:20 a.m., while I was trimming rosemary on the porch, Andrew arrived holding a thick file. His face was calm, but the heaviness in his eyes told me something new had surfaced. He set the folder on the patio table and said quietly, "Mom, the attorney wants us to sign some documents, but there's more. Serena opened 2 credit accounts in your name, about $80,000 total." For a moment, the sun felt too bright. I sat down slowly, my hand over my chest. He explained that she had used my social security number, my signature, even my old address. The purchases were extravagant jewelry spa memberships, a trip to Paris, fraud dressed as luxury. That afternoon, we met with Thomas Bennett, the attorney who had been handling the case. His office smelled of old books and quiet justice. "Mrs. Cole," he said gently, "we can pursue criminal charges, but Serena has offered a full civil settlement. She'll admit wrongdoing and relinquish all claims if Andrew agrees not to press charges." Andrew looked at me torn. "Mom, part of me wants her to face prison, but another part just wants peace." I held his hand and said softly, "Peace isn't weakness, son. Sometimes mercy is how we protect ourselves from hatred." He nodded slowly, and we signed the papers. Serena's name disappeared from every account, every document, every title. News traveled fast. Her family in Palm Beach cut ties, her friends turned distant, and the woman who once ruled rooms with diamonds and lies now rented a studio on the outskirts of Miami. I didn't rejoice. Justice, when it comes, doesn't need applause. It needs quiet acknowledgement. I had my name back, my dignity, and my home. That was enough. Weeks later, I rewrote my will. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. I left instructions that my estate would be shared by merit, not blood. The Coral Gables house would one day become a place for older women to gather to learn about finances and to tell their stories without shame. Because silence, I'd learned, is the soil where manipulation grows. Life after that was simple in the best way. Mornings with coffee and newspaper headlines that no longer made my pulse race. Afternoons spent pruning roses or reading under sunlight that streamed across the floor like a blessing. Andrew and Danielle often joined me for dinner, bringing laughter that filled every corner the lies had once claimed. One evening, as we sat on the porch eating paella, the same dish Michael had loved, Danielle said softly, "You know, I think your husband would be proud of you." I smiled. He'd be proud of all of us. The day Serena returned, it was late morning, and the sky shimmered with Florida heat. I was watering the garden when a tired silver car stopped at the gate. She stepped out, unrecognizable. Hair, dull clothes, wrinkled face, drawn thin. The woman who had once worn power like a scent now looked small against the bright sun. She called softly, "Mrs. Brenda, please, I just want to apologize." I didn't move at first. Water trickled over the roses. Then I said, "You can speak, but from there. I don't open gates for ghosts." She nodded, her voice shaking. "I've lost everything, my job, my friends. I just want you to know I really did love Andrew. I was just afraid." I looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, but with an old sadness. "Fear doesn't excuse cruelty," I said quietly. "You took years, you can't return, but you still have the rest of your life to live differently. That's your work now, not mine." Her eyes filled. "Do you think I can start over?" I shook my head gently. "A chance isn't something others give you. It's something you earn." Then I stepped back, closing the gate softly. She whispered thank you and walked away, the sound of her heels fading into sunlight. When her car disappeared, I turned back to the roses. Their petals glowed red and calm. I realized forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's the key we turn inside ourselves so we can breathe again. That afternoon, Rosa called to tell me my garden had been named the best in the neighborhood. I laughed, really laughed, the way I hadn't in years. Maybe healing isn't a miracle. Maybe it's just waking up one day and realizing you've stopped living in reaction to pain. That evening, Andrew and Danielle came for dinner. We sat on the porch as the sun melted into gold, the fountain murmuring softly nearby. "Mom, Andrew said, you've taught me more about love and strength than I ever learned from success." I smiled, ladling paella onto his plate. "Then learn one more thing. Never let anyone make you doubt your worth." As night fell, I looked at the keys on the table, the same ones Andrew had placed in my hand months ago. To anyone else, they were metal. To me, they were proof that truth once spoken can rebuild what deceit tried to destroy. I leaned back, letting the warm air wrap around me, and whispered to the stars. We went through the storm, and we kept our dignity. That's enough. If this story touched you, please like, share, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Tell me how you protect your dignity when life tests it. Because in the end, justice isn't just about punishment, it's about reclaiming peace, one honest breath at a time.